Hey guys, Nick Friend here. Thanks so much for coming back. Today we are talking about color contrast. So obviously we know what contrast is, which is the difference between light and dark, and specifically the gap between the lightest lights and the darkest darks. That's contrast. But there's an extra step to this, which is color contrast. Something like color contrast can actually be massively helpful to the storytelling process. So let's get into it. Now, color contrast kind of starts on the color wheel, which is this thing. That is called the color wheel, and that is the entire visible light spectrum that we as cinematographers, directors, photographers, whatever you do, this is where all of our color comes from. Now, the basic use of color contrast is something called split toning, and it is by far the most popular way to use color contrast in an image. And for lack of an insanely long explanation of what split toning is, basically you use complementary colors in the highlights and shadows to make an image look more dynamic. And the most popular version of this by a sizable margin is the teal and orange color scheme. Seriously, go look at any movie poster from an action movie over the past bazillion years, and you're gonna see the teal and orange color scheme, especially with the Transformers movies. And actually, I have a video coming up about Michael Bay, so stay tuned for that one. Right. We can use our color wheel to actually figure out what are the best contrasting colors that are complementary to one another. It's kind of based on that whole opposites attract idea. The reason teal and orange go so well together is because they are actually complementary colors, in that they sit opposite one another on the color wheel. This is also why the colors for Christmas look so good together, is because they are quite literally complementary colors. They are made for each other. Now, relatively obviously, complementary colors provide balance to an image because they quite literally are on opposite sides of the spectrum. So when you put them together, you have an inherent balance to your image. And by that, I mean the colors are equal and opposite at the same time. So the complementary color scheme is one way to do things, but there's also a bunch of different other sort of color schemes that you can use. My favorite is analogous colors. Now, analogous colors live on the color wheel relatively close to one another. If you break it up into triangles, you can operate with like a group of them in 1/3 of the wheel. That's kind of like the analogous color scheme. And you only pick colors from that little third. Now, inherently, if you take colors from that single part of the color wheel, your image is going to be out of balance because it's going to be too far onto one end of the spectrum of visible light. Now, that's not to say that the images look bad. It's just they're not complementary. They're analogous. It's just a different thing. And because they are analogous rather than complementary, they make a scene look relatively uneasy. Some examples of analogous colors are like yellow and red, kind of working in an analogous color scheme together. You can also find like blue and green working together in an analogous color situation. And all three of these different examples kind of look a little bit uneasy. It's not that it looks bad, it just looks out of balance. And you can use that as a storytelling tactic to create some sort of tension or unease inside of the scene if that's what the scene calls for. And that's how you can use color contrast as a storytelling tactic. This is a really basic breakdown of complementary and analogous color schemes. You can go way into detail. This video would be insanely long if I went over all of the parts of color schemes. And there's a whole bunch more color schemes, but my two favorite are complementary and analogous. After I figured out what these color schemes were, it was really fun to watch movies that do a really good job of using color contrast in the imagery. And some of my favorites are Neon Demon and Drive, really anything by Nicholas Winding Refn. Because of his use of color. It's just insane. Nobody does it the way that he does it. The Godfather does a really good use of the color orange. Breaking Bad does a really good use of the color green. Ex Machina does a really great job with the colors blue and red. And obviously all of the Star Wars movies with their lightsabers and everything else that they do with color in those films. Star Wars is a great example of good use of color. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you love the video, go ahead and subscribe. I put out these at least once a week. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.